Hi, everyone. My name is Kimberly Roa Tejera. I'm the events manager at Centro. We're so excited to have you join us here for the first event of the fall 2023 semester, our Library and Archives Lunch Hour exploring Antonia Pantoja through Centro's archival collection. This event stars Centro Digital Archivist Lindsay Wittwer and Lillian Jimenez, director of the film on Antonia Pantoja's life, Antonia Pantoja Presente. After we explore the Antonia Pantoja archives in this event, you'll get a link to watch the film On Her Life, directed by Lillian. We hope you enjoy this event.
All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. As Kimberly said, we're here to talk about Antonia Pantoja. And Centro is really lucky to be home of the Antonia Pantoja collection. This includes her Presidential Medal, which proudly hangs on our wall in our library and archive reading room, as well as what's, I think, really incredible about her is that we don't just have Antonia Pantoja's collection. We also have 8+ other collections in which she is heavily featured. We have ASPIRA of New York, we have ASPIRA of Washington, D.C. We have the Dr. Antonia Pantoja Fellowship Collection, which was a fellowship founded with money she received for her 80th birthday, as well as several other collections in which she shows up in other people's organizations, in correspondence, across collections. She's really woven through so many of the collections at Centro. It's impossible to reflect upon her work just by thinking about her collection, but by thinking about all of Centro's collections. And today we were so lucky to have Lillian Jimenez join us to talk about Antonia Pantoja. Thank you so much, Lillian, for joining us today.
Oh, thank you. I'm really happy to be here.
So I think what's really interesting about Antonia's collection at Centro is that when she donated it, it was very intentionally about her work. She really didn't focus a lot on her personal life. It was really focused on her work. And so as incredible and amazing as that is, and comprehensive, covering all the different organizations she worked at, we don't always get to know about her as a person. And I know that you worked so closely with her. I was wondering if you wanted to talk a little bit about how you met and about her as a person and the work that you did together.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So I met Antonia Pantoja when she was leaving Puerto Rico to come back to New York. She had decided that Puerto Rico was not the place for her, that New York was really where she wanted to be with her partner, Dr. Wilhelmina Perry. Toni was a very private person. And when I first met her, a friend introduced us, and she asked me for my resume, and I thought, wait a minute, I just want to be your friend. Why are you asking me for a resume? I was so taken aback by that. Little did I know that she already had plans for me. So I sent her my resume, and we went to have lunch, and I fell in love with her. She's just such an extraordinary person. What a lot of people don't understand about Antonia, because, as you said, the collection really features her professional life. And she was very serious about her professional life, but she was such a mischievous person. She was like a little imp, she would just have this very wry sense of humor. And was always planning. I just never stopped planning, always planning something. It didn't matter what it was. She said, we need a plan for this. So Toni, as I said, was a very private person. She grew up in a very working class family in Barrio Obrero in San Juan. And her grandfather worked in the American Tobacco Company. And you have photographs of the American Tobacco Company in the Centro, which I used in the film. And there's lots of photographs of people working in there. And her grandfather was an organizer. And so she lived with her grandparents in this very modest and humble home, but very, very organized and clean and structured, which I have to say had an enormous influence on her, because that's who she ultimately became, this incredibly organized person. And she learned from her grandfather, the foibles of organizing, but also how to do organizing, how to go out and really talk to people and persuade them about what could be done, what could be changed. So her family life had a real impact on her. She came to the United States when she was really young. She had gone to university. She had been a teacher in the hills of Puerto Rico. And, the family really depended on her income. And I think she really felt trapped. I think she had her first inklings as a lesbian at that time, but she didn't really act on it until she came to New York. So she came to New York in the 40s, I think 1944. So the war was still raging. And, she really began to discover herself and her love of knowledge and education and learning. She was a lifelong learner. She really did live a very bohemian life, which she writes about in her book. So I'm not saying anything that isn't in the book. But she was wild. I mean, she says she was wild. I used to call her the heathen, which it's very hard for people to understand when they look at her collection, which is all about her professional life. And the pictures are very staid, etc. But she really partied and lived in almost a commune on the Lower East Side near Houston Street in an old converted, I think, temple, a Jewish temple. And she really learned about, the cultures of many people because they were very international in that collective living situation. And then eventually she went back to school. She went to Hunter, and she met a group of Puerto Ricans, not very many, at Hunter College during that time in the 50s. And there she started to form organizations. She formed the Hispanic Young Adults Association. And then she moved on and helped to found PRACA, Puerto Rican Association for Community Affairs. She went on to found the Puerto Rican Forum. She went on to found PRCDP, ASPIRA. Just endless number of organizations, because again, she was incredibly organized and was always planning. She also moved to DC, and she established the research center there and created a book on Puerto Rican culture and history. So she was just always creating institutions. I met her when I was like 48. I'd been around the block a few times. So, I wasn't a kid. And I wasn't at first, like I had heard about her, but I had been part of the radical left. So I wasn't paying that much attention, quite frankly. But when I met her, I just thought, oh my God, this woman is like the embodiment of our Puerto Rican history here in New York, in San Diego, in Washington, in Puerto Rico, just extraordinary. And so I was really, as I said, I fell in love with her, and she became my mentor. And I had really extraordinary mentors in my life. So she became probably the most important one. So yeah, that was Toni Pantoja, very private. And towards the end of her life, I want to make sure that I say this, she wrote the book, and I asked her, what's the most important thing you've ever done? And she used to say ASPIRA, but as she was nearing the end of her life, she said, the most important thing to me isn't ASPIRA at this time in my life, as she's facing mortality. She said, it's really my relationship with Mina, with Dr. Wilhelmina Perry. And I want to write a book about that relationship. And she never got the chance to do that. I also asked her when I was in the very, very beginning stages of going to create this documentary. I said, I'm going to have to deal with your sexual orientation. And she said, you make the film that you feel you need to make. And so she really didn't put any restrictions on me. At that point, I think she was really ready to be out in the world. And, her cohort, they could not come out. They were not in a time of, gay liberation, that was many years later, or gay rights, or gay civil rights, or equality, or gay marriage. She preceded all of that with her cohorts, and many of those people are still not out, the ones that are still alive. But I think towards the end of her life, she did want to come out, and she wanted to work with LGBT students in ASPIRA, but her life was cut short at the age of 80.
Yeah, I have to say, one of the things that we've noticed in the archive, we have a lot of student groups that come through, and they see this woman standing with President Bill Clinton with this presidential medal, and when we do mention that she was a lesbian, there are always at least one student who just really is just like, wait, what? And they really connect with that, and I think it's been so powerful. So while she wasn't able to work directly with them, I do see that influence of just her being this iconic woman in in Puerto Rican culture and in New York City culture, and like in all the work that she did it's having an effect. And it's definitely something that many students are like, wait, what? And they want to learn more. They want to learn more about her, and they are inspired. And we see that, I mean, every single time she comes up in classes, and we bring that up. So I think that that is a really powerful piece of her legacy that is not necessarily seen in the collection, but is definitely around the collection, that supports the collection, that, you know, hearing stories, hearing oral histories, hearing conversations like this, that people can learn more about her as a person. I would also imagine that her being a lesbian actually potentially had a positive impact on the work that she did, in terms of being able to just kind of like jump in and do what she needed to get done in a way that she wasn't necessarily thinking about the, like, I guess, the sexual politics or orientation of the other people around her.
Yeah, you know, I talk about this because I think it's really important for young women in particular. You know, many of us who are straight or gay, lesbian, bi, trans, you know, we look for potential partners, and we do that sometimes in the work that we do. You know, the outstanding feature of Toni was that she wasn't interested in the men. She was interested in the women. So the men had no sway over her, you know, and most of the women would be like, oh, you know, I want to be careful. I don't want to, you know, upset the cart here because there may be a potential love interest. And she didn't have that. So she was really very assertive, and took a leadership role, like almost immediately. In spite of, you know, she had an accent, she wasn't born and raised in the United States. She was a tiny woman, very petite, who was adorable. I mean, she was really adorable looking. So men were constantly asking her out. I mean, she got several marriage proposals, she told me. She was so funny. But she really didn't care what the men thought. And you know, this was something I saw. You know, they would come into the room and she would just, like, you know, treat them as an equal. So I think it's really important for women to realize that that's a really important feature of equality, that you really treat people the same, no matter what, whether somebody's a potential love interest or not. And that may not be the case for a lot of women. A lot of women are like, I already have a partner, so I'm not interested in anybody in this group. But for some women, you know, that's what they look for. I know certainly when I was younger, that's what I was looking for, potential love interest, you know, somebody to date. And she wasn't. I mean, you know, she had her partners. And so I think that was something that was really important. I also want to say that, you know, I did a rough cut many years ago, and because I worked on this film for a long time, and not because, you know, I was stuck, but I was making two films at once, you know, the migration of Puerto Ricans to the United States, and then the film about Toni. So eventually I figured out I had to make a film about Toni. But, you know, when I had a rough cut, I went to ASPIRA, and, you know, these children looked like they were 10 years old to me. You know, I was really old by then, probably in my 50s already. And so I showed a rough cut, and this little girl, a little girl, really, just a petite girl. I think she's was Mexican American, Chicana. She gets, I didn't know that at the time. She gets up and she says, you know, is that her daughter in the film? And I'm like, oh boy, here it comes. And I said, no, that's not her daughter. And she said, oh, did she get married? And I said, no, she never married. And I thought, oh boy, where's this leading? And then she says, was she a lesbian? Just like that. And this is a room full of, I don't know what, 75 young people, and some of the instructors, some of the counselors, the organizers, etc. And so I said, yes. And she put her hands on her hips and said, you know, you're not being fair. You're not saying who she is. And that little girl really pushed me to deal with Toni being a lesbian. And I was so nervous about that because so many people in the community were saying to me, you're going to ruin her legacy. You're going to ruin her legacy. You know, people know her as this institution builder and this and that. And I thought, you know, this little girl is right. That is who she is. She is a lesbian. It is an absolutely integral part of who she is as a human being. So I have to deal with it. I called up her partner, Mina, and she said, yes, let's do it. And so we did it. And we did it as carefully as we could and as respectfully as we could, because she'd already passed by that time. So Mina talked about it from her perspective. Mm-hmm. And that's how we decided to, you know, basically out her in a way that we thought made sense and was respectful.
Yeah, that's really That's really incredible. I mean, I think that speaks to the youths who want to know that and see it as representing a full person instead of just one aspect of a person. In terms of like the work that she did, and I know that you were talking about how she, walked into a room and treated everybody as equals. I feel like she also was great at working with some really difficult people, but also, I know that she got into some conflicts with people, but then circled back around when you were making the film to be like, you've got to talk to this person. They're really integral, like really showing a level of respect that you might not get in another person. I was wondering if you could speak a little bit more about that and some of the challenges.
Yeah, there were a lot of people organizing in the Puerto Rican community when Tony arrived. Gilberto Gerena Valentin was somebody who had been in the labor movement. He was organizing Congreso del Pueblo. There were all these, hometown clubs. Cabo Rojeño, I know because my parents used to go off of 144th Street, off of Broadway. So he organized all these people, and they used to go to the, it was Idlewild, but it's LaGuardia Airport, and they would set up little tables there. And so, Manny Diaz, Gilberto Gerena Valentin, Evelyn Antonetti, all of these folks who were very progressive, socialists, Marxists, they would, orient people and help them find jobs, help them find housing. So they were organizing. Well, Tony pops in and she starts organizing, but she's organizing people who are mostly college students, not exclusively, but mostly. And so this group of more progressives used to call her and her group perfumados, which is, the perfumed ones. And they were doing the grassroots, and she was really, working through policy and at a professional level, starting organizations, the forum. ASPIRA. She took a break from ASPIRA to start the Puerto Rican Community Development Project in the 60s and the late 60s. And this was with money from the anti-poverty program. She had worked with African Americans from Harlem who had gotten money through HARU, which was basically anti-poverty funds. And so, these folks, the part of the contract was that she had to have these community meetings. And so she invited all these progressives, all these different sectors of the Puerto Rican community to come together. And little by little, they were totally committed to taking over the project. And so she's walking down the street someday and she sees this woman who's going to these general meetings, and she says, "Oh, you're going to the meeting after the meeting?" And she said, "What meeting after the meeting?" And so she said, "Oh, we always have a meeting after the meeting because, we're talking about how to take this over." And she said, "No, I didn't know anything about it. Oh, I must go to this." Exactly what she would say. And so she went and she thought, "Oh my God, they're trying to take it over." And so she goes back to the forum and she says, "These people are trying to take this over." And she said, "I think we should let them have it." And so she did. She bowed out and she let them have it. There was some tension and some conflict because of, I think competing ideologies, but also competing strategies on how to organize the Puerto Rican community. And so many years later, she said to me, "These are all the people you must talk to." I was doing oral histories of all of the institutions, but of organizing in New York. And so she said, "You must speak to Gilberto Gerena Valentin. You must speak to Manny Diaz." And Manny Diaz was very upset with her. He thought that she had gotten him ousted from the board of the Puerto Rican Forum. And so she said, I want to patch it up with Manny. I really liked Manny. I want to patch it up with him. And she did. And I was sort of the mediator sitting there at this lunch table as they're, doing a rapprochement. And then afterwards, Manny let me do his oral histories. I attended after Tony, I think Tony had passed by then. I attended the memorial for Dr. Helen Rodriguez Trias, who was also one of my heroes, Shiros. And these men came up to me and they said, "Oh, are you going to tell us about Tony, how she started organizing?" And I said, "Well, it's really funny that you should say that because she directed me to go to you to talk about your organizing." And so, she didn't hold these grudges like some of us do. She really said, "These people are important. You have to talk to them. This is our history." And since it's not codified in any historical books or journals or anything, we have to get it down on tape. And so I interviewed a lot of these people. I think of Joe Erasmo in particular. And I also interviewed Joe Montserrat, who was, I think her arch nemesis. He was president of the Board of Education when Tony and a group of other folks, including the Puerto Rican at the time, Puerto Rican Education and Defense Fund, Puerto Rican Legal Education and Defense Fund, sued the city of New York for bilingual education. And he was on the board of the Board of Education. But so was Hernan Lafontaine, who was part of their group. And so he was the insider who was giving them all the information for the lawsuit. And Alice Cardona was at ASPIRA, and she was, so these are all figures that are really important in our history. Alice Cardona worked at ASPIRA, and she helped to organize the parents to do the depositions. So all of these students had been in ASPIRA, were now working at the Puerto Rican Legal Defense and Education Fund. So there were these groups of leaders that she had cultivated and nurtured that were now suing the city of New York for bilingual education. And, you know, it's really telling. I said this the other night when I was talking with some other people. Tony and Mina organized a conference right after she came to New York. I can't remember the date. It was at the CUNY down on 34th Street. And the Graduate Center. And Contra Marea y Mar, something like that. And, you know, so they're talking about bilingual education. All these people got up to speak, blah, blah, blah. And then it was chance for the audience members to get up. And this young, blonde-haired young man gets up and he says, my name is so-and-so, and I'm Polish. I came from Poland at the age of blah, blah, blah. And it's because of the Puerto Ricans that I am able to be in college and speak English, because I was immediately put into a bilingual class. And we were stunned. I don't know what else to say. I almost fell off my chair. And you know, it was extraordinary. When I was doing more research on bilingual education, you know, I was going to conferences, and there were Asians, and there were people from other countries, just an extraordinary mix of people who, frankly, you know, had bilingual education because of the work that Puerto Ricans had done. I also want to mention Evelina Antonetti, because she started the first bilingual school for Spanish and English for Puerto Ricans in the South Bronx, PS 25. And so her collection is there. So, you know, there should be some way in which it sort of intersects. And again, many of the people who are now considered, you know, the doyens of bilingual education, Sonia Nieto, etc., taught at that school, and they're in my film, you know, teaching at PS 25. So, you know, the film really brings together a lot of people. Julio Morales is in the film, and he was absolutely critical in the struggle around community control. And he wasn't an aspirante, but he became friends with Tony, and she used to bring him to all the foundations, and she would say, you see this young man? This is who I want the aspirantes to grow up to be. He's a leader. And he would just be like, okay, whatever Tony wants, you know? Yeah, so she had such an impact on so many lives. I mean, it didn't matter where we were. We were in an airport in Puerto Rico, and this woman comes up to her, Doña Antonia Pantoja, you know, my children were in ASPIRA. So some of these women who would come up to her would say, I was a madrina. And this speaks to the holistic nature of her work. So when she was working with ASPIRA, she thought, you know, there's all these women who are factory workers who are connected to these children, and these children have no money to go to college and buy books. And so she organized these union workers from the ILGWU to be madrinas, and they would do fundraisers and support the children. Sometimes they would take them because the parents couldn't, so they would accompany the young people to college. And, you know, they were a part of ASPIRA, the whole sort of like movement that she created. She also worked with bodegueros because she also thought about economic development a lot. And so she worked with this guy, Johnny Torres. I think you have his collection, right? Who had been like a designer, a hotel lobby designer or something. And he started an entity called Metro, where the bodegueros could get together and purchase their produce, their products at a lower rate. And you know, it just spoke to her understanding of the complexity and all of the different components that make up a community. It isn't just the young people, it's also all of the people that are surrounding them and in the community. And I learned actually through Johnny Torres the critical nature of bodegas. I grew up in Harlem, and so my father used to hang out in a bodega on the corner, and we knew everybody. Everybody knew us as las hijas de jamón, and that place was like the center. You wanted to find out what was going on, you would go to the bodega and find out. It was also a place that offered credit where you could not get credit anyplace else. And so, the bodeguero had or the dependiente, who was his assistant, had this little ledger, and they would write down everything that you purchased. And then your parents would pay for it, either on a monthly basis or whatever arrangements they had made. So, yeah, she was really pretty comprehensive, and she took that understanding of economic development to San Diego, and then later on to Puerto Rico, where she started Producir. And she also was very keen on arts and culture. I want to say that because, again, she really thought you can't do community development if you don't have arts and culture.
Absolutely. Well, this has been so fantastic so far. I did want to open it up to questions. So if people wanted to add their questions to the Q&A, there's a button at the bottom of the Zoom. I want to make sure we have time to ask some questions. Give people a second to think about their questions. And I have to say, I mean, nearly every single person that you mentioned by name, we have their collection or the collection of their organizations. So I think it just really speaks to the impact she had and how she's found throughout our archives. And I think in a broader sense, just how much our archives overlap with each other. And there's so many people who cross over into different areas, just depending on their interest and what they did early in their life versus later in their life. And I think she's really a testament to how that really shines throughout our archives, but how much she is represented. So I feel like she really is one of those people who is just found everywhere and can be a wonderful resource in so many different areas.
Yeah. And I did 17 hours of oral history with her. And, I also did the oral histories of a lot of the folks who participated in all of the institutions that she created. And I want to say one thing about the institutions. She grew up in a working class family, and her grandfather was a labor organizer. And they really did teach her certain ethics, which she, I think, implemented and institutionalized in all of the organizations that she worked at. And those were the same ethics that I grew up with. So I recognized them immediately when I met her and we talked about all of the different organizations, the whole question of honesty and integrity and community service and how you give back, because, you're not raised in a vacuum, you're raised within a community. And so how important it was to give back to that community, and how she really institutionalized that, people took an oath to give back to the community through the areito.
Oh, that's incredible.
Yeah,
So,
I think there's some questions now.
Yeah. So anonymous attendee asks, regarding your film, Antonia Pantoja Presente, what was the greatest challenge when telling Dr. Pantoja's story, aside from her sexuality? And what are you most proud of about the film?
Well, as I said before, I was really making two films at once, and that was the big challenge, because I really felt an obligation to talk about the migration of Puerto Ricans to New York, because we were so misunderstood. We had been examined by sociologists. We had, this pathology that we were was inscribed on us. We were the Puerto Rican problem. I grew up saying I was Spanish. My mother told me I had to say I was Spanish, because to say you were Puerto Rican in the 50s was like you were the dredges of the earth. So it was really important to talk about that migration and the political and economic factors that, got people here. And I did a lot of research, as I said. I mean, I talked to a lot of people. I found all kinds of footage, archival footage about Puerto Ricans, in spite of, everything being about gangs and us as a problem. I did find a lot of footage that was not terrible, which I used as much as I possibly could. And so that was, for me, the biggest challenge. Tony got lost. She just we had a rough cut and she was nowhere in the film. And so people said, well, where the hell is Tony? She's lost. You have all this great stuff on the migration, but there's not very mumuch about her. And I thought, well, so this is her story and she's one of those migrants. So we're going to, that for me was the biggest challenge. The second one was, as the questioner has indicated, her sexuality. I got a lot of flack. Even after I made the film, people would say at screenings, you're going to ruin her legacy. Why did you have to deal with her as a lesbian? That has nothing to do with everything that she did. And I thought, I think it has everything to do with everything that she did. So that's the first question. What was the second question? Oh, what am I most proud of? Oddly enough, you make a film and then at the end you're like, oh God, why did I make this film this way? I should have done this. I should have done that. I should have made it more dramatic. There were more dramatic moments. I think what I was most proud of is that people would say, you really captured Tony. That for me was like the most important thing. I don't believe in agitprop. I don't believe in telling people what to believe. I think you give people information, you move them in a certain direction, but ultimately they make a choice about what they want to believe. And so I wanted them to get a sense of her through her personality, and some of her personality really came through. And as I said, she was a private person, so it wasn't easy to do. I would ask her all these questions and she would hem and haw and beat around the bush. And then one time we're in at La Palguera and it's getting dark and it's getting late, and there's all this noise of boats on the water, and I'm like, oh Jesus, we're not getting anything. I think I wore her down. And then she finally says, I asked her why, I'm afraid of things, and I have to overcome that fear. Are you afraid? Have you ever been afraid? It seems like you were never afraid. And she said, I'm in control of myself. I'm very sure of myself. And I'm in control of myself. And that's why I'm not afraid. And then she just laughs. And that was just a spectacular moment for me. I thought, oh, here she is. And it was just her expression, and then, I showed the film in Connecticut, and Hernan Lafontaine was there, and he'd worked with her for many years in various organizations, but most explicitly, as the insider during the bilingual consent decree struggle. And at the end, he was very misty-eyed, and he said, oh my God, I can't believe it. You captured her. You really captured her. I thought I was going to fall off the chair. I was like, oh man, that's what I wanted to do. I wanted people to see this extraordinary human being. And that was my biggest, I think, my biggest joy. Well, and meeting her was my biggest joy. And meeting Mina, they were just such an exceptional couple.
Yeah, from having gotten a wonderful opportunity to speak with Mina a little bit, like every time I get to see her when she comes to Centro, I feel like she's so incredible, like a kindred spirit. And I can certainly see that in the film that carries out. So now that it's 2023, do you feel your film still depicts Dr. Pantoja in the best way possible? In hindsight, would you change anything about the film?
Well, as I said just a few minutes ago, I'd make it more dramatic, but that's more formal than it is in terms of content. I would absolutely talk about her life, her political life. She was for the independence of Puerto Rico. She was a Marxist, and she was a socialist, and everything with a small m and a small s. So she wasn't, this rip-roaring, like, I'm a Marxist and I do dialectical historical materialism. She was not that kind of a person. She just really did a good analysis, she had really a critical analysis of the world and the situation and everything around her. And she, participated in a tribunal. And I had some of that footage of her participating in a tribunal on Vieques, to get the Marina, the Navy, out of Vieques. But the footage was so bad that I couldn't use it. And I didn't have any footage, any B-roll, what we call B-roll of her political life. So I thought, well, I've covered, I think, as much ground. But, she was really quite a political person. And it was when she was doing her PhD that I think she became a Marxist. She was running with all these, very progressive people, socialist Marxists, who were, very focused on political economy. And so, I would do more about her political life, because she really had a great impact on a lot of people. One of the women in the film, Digna Sanchez, was the head of PSP for many, many years. I mean, Juan Maribras was the head of PSP, but she was in the Central Committee and has been an activist all her life. And she attributes that to Tony, to Antonia Pantoja. You know, many people attribute it. Angel Luis Ortiz from Philadelphia, I learned the other day, you know, says that she was the one that turned his life around and, you know, really helped him understand the reality of the world. And he said that she was the most subversive person that he ever met. And I thought, Tony, the most subversive person? But she really provided the information for people to make up their mind. You know, so I felt an affinity with her in that way. She was never saying, you must believe what I believe. She just said, well, this is how I see it. You need to think about that, you know, think about it. So yeah, I would definitely have included more about, well, something about her political life.
Great. Well, it's time to unfortunately wrap up. I mean, Lillian, I could talk with you for hours. It's so fascinating to hear you talk about Antonia and to hear so many different facets of her that we don't necessarily, as we've said, get in the archival collection, but that I think are emerging, especially as we are coming, you know, celebrating her centennial this year in Centro. In addition to this wonderful library and archives lunch hour with you, we have an event on the 12th that also celebrates her and her work, her legendary work with ASPIRA. And I think the link is in the chat. I just really like to thank you. I look forward to seeing you on the 12th.
Great, super, I do too.
I would also like to say to everyone out there, the Central Library and Archives, our reading room is open. We are open 10 to 5, Monday through Friday. So certainly feel free to follow up. We are by appointment only, but we have that link on our website, and we're always, you know, welcome to have people come in. As we always say, we are the only CUNY library that is open fully to the public. So we do welcome walk-ins off the street, but we love appointments so we can, you know, allow researchers of any stripe to hit the ground running with their research, including looking at Dr. Pantoja's collection.
Thank you, Lindsay, and thank you, Lillian. And to everyone who wants to see the movie, I have linked it in the chat. Please watch the movie in anticipation for the event next Tuesday at 6 p.m. at the Silberman School of Social Work. There is also a virtual component if you can't make it to East Harlem. It will be Lillian, joined by Dr. Pantoja's life partner, Wilhelmina Perry, and Lourdes Torres, who I believe is in this panel who's in this chat today. I think she joined us virtually for this conversation. And yeah, and members of ASPIRA's students, current aspirantes and former aspirantes, we encourage you to stop by, get a look at this panel. And then at the very end of the panel, we will be unveiling a exhibition on Antonia Pantoja's life that will be held at the reading room and will be free to anyone. So if you want any more information on Antonia Pantoja, please watch the film and join us next Tuesday.